are here, and in a moment, we're going to have the joint meeting of the Audits Committee and the Public Safety Committee. Prior to getting to that, I'm going to recommend to the full council that items 2 through 4 be approved, I guess, except, well, 2 is an approval that we'll send to council with my name on it. 3 and 4 are these bureaucratic requests for the city attorney to draft ordinances, because the city attorney's office believes it's not enough for a council member to do a motion. They actually need to have a committee say something. So I'm saying something. That's not going to, that, my hope is that policy lasts for about a year, and then we'll be done with that silliness. I want to emphasize to the city attorney's office, it's all or nothing on these gun ordinances. They will all come back at the same time for one omnibus hearing on the gun ordinances here. Do we have a target date for that, Ms. Stengel, when you want to have the gun ordinances?
The 30, June 15th, John? I'm sorry, July 15th, is that the date we said? Yes.
John White, City Clerk. We sent letters to the City Attorney requesting the ordinances. I believe our due date is either July 15 or the 22nd.
Okay. So hopefully we will have them all back at that time. So that'll be the action on the public safety agenda. Mr. Weezer, there's one more item on the agenda. Mr. Metzel, why don't you come forward, and if you could briefly do the DNA numbers game, that would be great, and then we're going to get on to the fire department.
Great. Good morning. Greg Matheson, Director of Los Angeles Police Department Crime Laboratory. Quickly, the total backlog of unanalyzed sexual assault cases currently sits at 7,324. Out of those, 245 have been identified as priority by detectives, but the total is 7,324. Our hits to offenders is currently sitting at 124 for 2008. And as far as the grant from your office, let's see, 70 cases have been screened, 45 have gone on to profiling, and out of that, so far, 6 have been uploaded into CODIS. And there's still several more that are in review to be uploaded.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And we will, Ms. Stengel will follow up with you in your office in terms of what the future, what makes sense for future updates in the committee, because we do not want to burden you or RHD.
Okay, great.
But we appreciate everything that you do. And Mr. Weezer, they're here every week because it's sort of the orphan issue in the city, which the council and the mayor addressed somewhat in the last budget, but which unfortunately there's still 7,000 rape kits that are sitting in freezers that are parked in Piper Tech, plugged in with their portable generators, and the freezers just keep humming and humming and humming, and 7,000 rapes and sexual assaults. Evidence is just sitting there waiting to be tested while the perpetrators presumably are out on the streets assaulting people to this day. It's just one of the scandals of this city, and Mr. Matheson and his colleagues are doing everything to address it, but they can't unless we give them more resources. At least we've given them a few more resources, but that's why I keep it here. And you're a captive audience. You're stuck. You had to hear. You had to hear about it this week.
Not only here, but every year through Budget and Finance, as I sit on that committee, so you go down there and advocate for more resources for this unit. So,
thank you for coming this week.
You're welcome.
Okay, that concludes the regular public safety meeting. Mr. Weezer, why don't you take it away on our joint meeting?
thank you very much, and good morning. As the chair of the Government Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee, we've been working with the Public Safety Committee and getting quarterly reports on the developments in the Fire Department's Professional Standards Division. As you know, as we closed out our budget for the upcoming fiscal year, we advocated and inserted additional funding and resources to make this division move forward. There's been a lot of progress, as you know. Controller Chick came out with an audit not too long ago which praised the fire department for the work and progress it's been doing to this point. But these two committees will continue to have these quarterly meetings to address this very important issue in our fire department. And I first want to thank Chief Barry for his commitment in the work he's doing. As you know, Controller Chick was very happy to hear some of the progress that has been made. And so with that, I'll open it up and ask the Chief if he could address the committee on the updates on the Professional Standards Division and where we are with it.
And just, Mr. White, I guess you should probably just technically call each and every one of these items so that they're here.
Items 5 through 10?
I think we're hearing them all together. right?
Okay. I could read them or we could proceed.
You said that. All right, so there we go.
5 through 10.
You're right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just going to give you an update of what we've been doing in the last quarter since we reported last. We've been working with detail staff as we were then in the EEO area and also in our investigative internal affairs unit as well, continuing with that through details. We've been developing new investigative procedures and processes in light of the fact that the Firefighters' Bill of Rights that came out January 1st has been put into place. And so we've been working with the employee organizations to finalize meet and confer issues that need to be addressed and also to really just change what our procedures have been to make them more efficient and more effective. We're in the final stages of developing or finalizing the automated complaint tracking system that we've talked about, and somewhere in the middle of July, maybe the end of July, we'll have that in place. We made some tweaks to it based on, again, the change in procedures based on the Firefighters' Bill of Rights, and so we had to make some changes to that, and we anticipate sometime in July being able to activate that. As you just stated, went through the budget process, and we were given some funding to initiate the Professional Standards Division. We had $800,000 in our last year's budget that we reallocated toward professional standards, as well as approximately $200,000 that's been put in the new money to initiate the Professional Standards Division. We're in the process working with the Personnel Department as we speak to get interviews in place to start filling the vacancies that will be put in place July 1st. Again, there are 5 civilian vacancies that are going to be activated effective July 1st, and we're in the process of getting the job descriptions and doing the interviews to fill those positions. We have a 6th position that was in our budget that was frozen. It's going to be unfrozen, so there'll be a total of 6 civilian positions that will be activated on July 1st.
Thank you very much, Chief. And we previously provided funds to hire an assistant fire chief to oversee the Professional Standards Division. I understand that Chief Ralph Terrazas has been appointed.
Yes, Chief Terrazas is here today. I'd like to have him come forward, introduce him to the committee. Chief
And
Terrazas.
can you just briefly provide us an update on some of the work that you've been doing, Chief?
Gladly. As you mentioned, my name is Ralph Terrazas, Assistant Chief assigned to the Professional Standards Division. I've been there for approximately 6 months now. We are making progress on multiple fronts. As the Chief stated, developing processes and procedures. We're trying to professionalize it through increased training, through utilizing the City Attorney's Office on a regular basis to get good guidance. We're also working hard on the complaint tracking system. We have a standing meeting with them every week. We're ready to roll out our test phase July 1, and we'll be using the information portal. On that portal, which is internet-based, you'll be able to print up a form, a complaint form, fill it out and submit it through mail or fax directly to Professional Standards Division. The other activities we have going on include, as the Chief stated, the staffing. We've been working very closely with the Personnel Department to develop the job descriptions, to determine the scope of the work to be performed. We have very good news. I don't want to be premature, and I'll let Personnel Department talk to it, but we have a very high interest in these new positions. The components of PSD, the major sections include EEO, Internal Affairs, Litigation, and Mediation and Effectiveness Unit. Our Internal Affairs section processes all our complaints. We are tracking our investigations to quantify the workload. Prior to my arrival, we didn't have good hard numbers, and we're starting to track how many, how long, how many interviews are we conducting, what's the turnaround time. We're also taking advantage on the EEO side of some part-time employees with significant years of experience, over 30 years each. Now we have a strong EEO component that we will supplement with additional staffing. The Mediation and Effectiveness Unit, that's something new. They're not in place yet, but that'll give us the ability to be proactive and not just reactive. proactive in the sense that when we determine that there's issues out there that are not discipline-based, but could use some training, some mentorship, some teamwork, some coaching, those people will be tasked with applying those types of measures. That concludes my statement. Any questions?
No, thank you. And I think as we move forward, the quantifying of the processes that have been put in place is something that these two committees will be very interested in. And I think once all our questions right now are going to be focused mostly on how we're building the structure. Eventually, we want to get to a place where, after we've created the structure, have things improved. And the way we can monitor that is by quantifying the actual reporting, the incidents, and are we in fact lessening the amounts of hazing or any other activity that has occurred in the past in the fire department. So I think we're on the right track. And one final question, Assistant Chief, is there is a Chief Special Investigator that will report to you. And where are we in the process? Are we currently hiring that person? Have we hired that person?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'd like to turn that over to personnel, if you don't mind. They have all the specifics.
Okay.
That position comes into effect July 1st, and so
Pardon me?
position comes into effect July 1st, and we're very close to finalizing that, but I'll let personnel speak
Okay.
more specifically.
Hi, Raylan Napper, Personnel Department. We are currently recruiting for that position. We have received about 95 applications. We targeted lawyers and human resources professionals. And we plan to do interviews on July 7th. Schedule's pending. We're going to do a panel interview, kind of simulating executive search procedure. We're going to have a panel interview, and then with Chief Terrazas will be a member of, and then a final interview with the chief.
And briefly, the qualifications are, do they have to be a civilian, non-civilian? It doesn't matter?
Well,
Go ahead.
it's a civilian position,
it's a
yes.
civilian position,
Yes.
okay.
And our requirements were a 4-year degree with 5 years of investigation experience in related fields like EEO and discipline and law, fraud, waste, abuse. And then 2 years of that needs to be, at least 2 years needs to be at a supervisory level. And then we also put in there that a Juris Doctor was preferred.
Was preferred?
Yes.
Okay. How about the human relations advocate? What's the criteria for that position?
That criteria, that's a civil service classification. I don't know offhand, but I think it's probably a degree in a certain field. That's an entry-level class. And with that position, the fire department already had the human relations training program, and they had a part-time person that they intend to make an emergency appointment. So that one will be good to go July 1.
Great, thank you. And Chief, my final question on these issues is do you have a current organizational chart that you could share with the committee on how we finalized what the structure will look like? There was a lot of discussion at the last joint meeting, and thank you very much. Also here with us is a commissioner for the fire department, Janethia Hayes, and would you mind sharing some of your thoughts as the commission has been following the progress of the Professional Standards Division? And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Morning.
And thank you for inviting the commission. We have been following, the commission has been following, and we've been getting reports on a regular basis. It's a standing item on the commission agenda. And so we have been getting information from Chief Berry and from Chief Terrazas about the Professional Standards Division and how it's being, how it's working. One of the things I do need to say that I am concerned about is because of the fiscal climate that we're in, the positions that should be there in this first phase are going to be hard for them to put all those positions, to put permanent people into all of those positions. And Chief Berry and I have talked about that, and the Commission does have some concern about that as an oversight body, because it seems to me in the very beginning, we can't continue to have people rotating in and out, if that makes sense to you as committee members. When you're putting a new structure together, one that is as important as looking at discipline and trying to make sure there's consistency and trying to make sure that the new disciplinary guidelines, which also impact the new Firefighters Bill of Rights, and trying to make sure that you get people trained for investigative kinds of work that needs to be done. My concern and the Commission's concern, of course, then, is with consistency of personnel. We also need to make sure that the civilian investigators that are to be paired with the sworn investigators and the civilian people that will be working in the professional standards division have the proper training that they need, because I believe that Chief Berry and Chief Terrazas are correct in that there's a certain kind of uniqueness to people who work in the fire service and to the Los Angeles Fire Department, so that when you have civilians, they really need to have time to be trained so that they do understand everything that goes into investigating when you have sworn personnel. And when you have personnel that have really and truly, they're not, I wouldn't call them constraints, but there are things that need to be done, and they need to be done properly, and you need to take into consideration that we need to have people paired with those people who understand, I believe, LAFD. But in thinking about the fact that we're going to do this in 5 stages, I would say that the Commission, I think, is pleased with the progress that's being made. I don't believe that some of these things can be changed because there's, we do have a physical crisis in the city. We all agree that there's a physical crisis in the city. So some of it really is about fiscal resources that need to come into the department. But in general, the Commission has been pleased by the reports that Chief Berry has been giving. Chief Terrazzo has come to the stakeholders work group. What I'm happiest about is the transparency of the work. We finally have a relationship between the Commission and the fire department so that there is transparency and that there is collaboration without there being a lot of adversarial, hostile, turf kinds of battles that go on between the Commission and the department, which I personally believe, I think Councilmember Weezar can remember our time on the board, I personally believe that that is the best way for oversight to happen. If you develop a relationship where there is transparency, where there is collaboration, where each entity understands what their role is. Our role is certainly oversight, but I don't think that that can happen if there's not transparency and if there's not some ability for the Commission to work in collaboration with the department, which I think is happening now in a way that is better than it has been in the past. And I think that's largely due to the fact that I really believe that Chief Berry believes that the same thing that the Commission wants is the same thing that the department wants.
Thank you, and thank you to the Fire Commission for the work you've been doing in addressing this issue and putting it as a priority. One final question is, Jenny, Commissioner, and that is the independent assessor. How do you see that person interacting with the assistant chief or the complaint systems moderator? Are they going to be housed in the same building or not? And how do they interact in
I see them being housed
work?
in the same building. I see them being housed in that suite of offices that house the rest of the Commission staff. And I see that person reporting actually directly to the Commission, because I think that has to happen. I feel so strongly about the fact that if we are going to have somebody that really operates outside of the chain of command, and if you really are going, whatever you call the person, independent assessor, inspector general, whatever that person is called, we have to make sure that that person has the independence to be able to go in and monitor PSD, monitor the workings of PSD, to make sure that PSD in fact is doing the things that it needs to do with respect to consistency when we're talking about discipline, with respect to consistency when we're talking about EEO complaints. And also, the reason that that person needs to be so independent and really needs to report to a commission is because there are going to be complaints, of course, that will come at a very high level. There will be people that will actually bring complaints against, for example, the fire chief himself, or that may in fact have a complaint against Chief Terrazzo or whoever ultimately winds up in that spot. So I also see that person, that independent assessor or the inspector general, being able to in fact handle those kinds of complaints. So I do believe that that person is going to have a staff that has some investigative skill, has an investigative skill set. I don't know that it needs to be a large number of people, but I think there will be complaints that the independent assessor will need to take. And I also think that that person will need to have staff that has a skill set that allows them to monitor, to collect the data, to be able to run reports so that there is a true evaluative component to PSD. There's no way for us to determine whether or not things are getting better or worse unless we have somebody who can do an independent analysis, which also then requires, not that you're asking me, but it requires also that the technology and the portal work that Georgia Matera and Mr. Blumhoff are working on gets up and running. And once again, we understand that, with the fiscal crisis in the city, we understand that that's going to take a little longer than it would have. But you're going to need to have all of those things in place, in my opinion. You're going to need to have all of those things in place if you are really going to put together a strong monitoring system. You're going to need to be able to pull reports. You're going to need to be able to have them analyzed by someone who doesn't have anything to gain or lose by being a part of a command staff or worrying about how that's going to affect their promotion or their career within LAFD. Yeah. So, I know that was a broader answer than you asked me for, but I think you have to take all of these things in consideration, and I think you have to integrate all of these things as you're thinking through what PSD does, but then what the role of that independent assessor ultimately does, and so why that person is going to need a small staff as well that's highly skilled and highly trained, because I don't see how you get this done otherwise. I don't see how you really do monitor. As always, we all have to understand, I certainly understand, that commissions are in place for 4 years. If we're lucky and we continue in administration for 8 years, but this needs to be strong enough so that all of those things can be done and those reports can continually come to a commission, any commission. Shouldn't have anything to do with who's in place now. We need to be looking at how we're going to save the city from these lawsuits, how we're going to make sure that the workplace works for everyone, and how we maintain independence. And I see that as having a strong independent assessor who's in place but has the ability to run reports, do the analysis, do the evaluation, make sure that gets brought back to not just the commission but management. And then there has to be some way to control and to make sure that management makes the necessary changes. Once a report is run, once an evaluation is done, if we find that things need to be changed or things need to be looked at, then you've also got to put a function in with an independent assessor so that that becomes something that the policymaking board, which is the Board of Fire Commissioners, can instruct, in fact, a fire chief to do, if that makes sense.
Councilmember, just if I could add, the independent assessor, as you know, is going to be put in place sometime around January of '09, and we'll be working with the commission, but just so to answer your question, we are making provisions, so if the commission does want to have them off-site, we'll have those provisions made so they can be off-site if the commission wishes.
Good, thank you. At this point,
Can I add something to that also? Sure. I concur with everything the commissioners said. I think that my position will have to work very closely with the independent assessor. We're developing the complaint tracking system now, and we're developing in such a manner that we can run all types of reports. There are certain stations that have a high frequency of complaints, certain officers, certain types of complaints. So we're building in that ability to ask the system many questions. And with that data, we'll be able to target our efforts to prevent it and when we have to, deal with it. Mm-hmm. So we're on the same page with that. And as the chief said, that person is not coming on board till January. So we don't have the prep work in terms of the job description, but we are thinking about logistics, where are they going to work, what's their equipment going to be, and things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
One final thing, Councilmember Weezer. The Commission has asked Commissioner Andrew Freeman to take the lead on this because of his past experience. I don't know whether many of you know that Commissioner Freeman, not only is he an attorney, but he's been a hearing officer with the LA County Civil Service Commission. He's been a special advisor to the Sheriff Lee Baca. And he simply has a body of expertise. And what he has done, along with B. Lopez and artist Nishihara, is they have already prepared a draft for that inspector general or that independent assessor. I apologize. I was out of town, so we didn't have time to make sure that we would get this to the committee ahead of time, but we will make sure that all of the joint committee members get a copy of this first draft of the classification and what it is that we're looking at and what it is that we're thinking about in terms of the duties and the features and the office and the skills that we think are necessary. It's very comprehensive, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. Chief Yamahata has a copy, Chief Berry has a copy, Chief Terrazzo has a copy, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. It's in its second draft. I'm sure there'll be other iterations of it. But I think that work also is going well. And from the Commission's perspective, I think we need to have the department working with us, although we understand that this is going to be an independent person, that it's really up to the Commission to do a final. But I think that there is a need to have the department engaged in this work with the Commission. Because once again, it really is going to be that melding. I really believe that that's what's been missing in the past. It was missing in 1995, which is how we found ourselves here, in 2008. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I think the department has done an excellent job of is allowing the Commission to attend meetings. I have to say to you that it never occurred to me that it would take up this much of my time to be on the Fire Commission. It has been a rewarding experience, though. But we do have meetings. We do talk to one another. Chief Terrazzo has been very good about coming to several meetings with commissioners. Chief Berry has been very good about meeting with us, and I think it's going to be that kind of work that's going to strengthen what we're doing. And I think then the council and the city and the mayor will see that this is work that we really all believe has to be done. It has to set the foundation in order for us to, in fact, improve circumstances.
Thank you. And at this point, I wanted to invite up Steve Tufts from MUFLEC. If you don't mind staying there, Commissioner, we could, if there are any additional comments you want to make as you hear additional testimony here. And Councilmember Weiss, are you anything at this time? Okay.
Good morning.
Welcome. And your thoughts on the progress of the PSD?
Well, like Ms. Hudley Hayes said, she pretty much spelled it out. We weren't mentioned at all, but actually UFLEC has been working hard with the administration and the commission. I have a big problem, though, with the I guess, whatever title you want to call it, Attorney General. That actually has to be an attorney. I don't know any other HR person's just not going to work. We don't need a warm and fuzzy person. We need somebody who knows the law. Right now, the city attorney, for whatever reason, chooses to challenge us on all issues. Okay, it's not a fight between labor and management. We want to do the best for our people. We got a case that's going to get filed here probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks that could have been avoided 2 weeks ago. And it's always a fight with the city attorney. And it shouldn't be. They should be getting advice that's going to protect the citizens' assets, not spend them. Mm-hmm. And by having an attorney for the Inspector General, they will be familiar with the Peace Officer Bill of Rights and the Firefighter Bill of Rights, and they won't be violated because that overrides the city charter. And we got to make sure that's covered. So, okay. But other than that, it's moving right along.
Well,
Is there any chance that this? Could anyone give me a good reason why it wouldn't be an attorney?
From our standpoint, we haven't been involved in that process because it is our oversight. So I'll turn it over to the commission.
I don't think that we would be opposed to it being an attorney. But I want to say to you that I don't want to narrow it down to saying we're only going to look at attorneys. And I agree with Steve. We don't need an HR person. This is not a person who should be versed in human relations, while I am not eschewing them, and I'm certainly not, wanting to say that that's not important. What we need is a person who, yes, understands the law. We need a person who understands not only the city codes, but the state codes, the federal codes, all of those things that cover sworn personnel. At this point, and that is not to say that we wouldn't ultimately come to a decision that it just absolutely has to be an attorney, but at this point, I am saying that I think what we need to do is we need to, in fact, keep our options open, and mainly what we need to be looking at is what a skill set looks like. What does a skill set look like for someone who's going to be an independent assessor, an inspector general, whatever the title is? That for me is not important. What for me is important is how do we all sit down and determine what the body of work is that we're expecting that person to do, and then how do we match that?
Are there any examples of inspectors general who are not attorneys that we know of in government?
Well, Councilmember Weezer and I hired, and together we were on the board at the time when we pushed for an inspector general over at LAUSD, and ultimately we hired someone. The first inspector general at LAUSD was Don Molinex, who was not an attorney, but he had a huge background. He came from CIA, quite frankly. I don't know how scary that sounds to people, but in fact, he turned out to be extraordinarily well prepared for the job, and he was in fact not a licensed attorney in any state. That wasn't his background. His background was in investigative skills, but he also understood how to, in fact, apply all the laws that were applicable to do what I think what Steve Tufts is talking about, to make sure that people's rights are not trampled on, to make sure that all of that's taken care of. But that would be my one example of having someone who was not an attorney. It's not that they didn't have legal expertise.
But they did.
I'm sorry, but that person, was that person dealing with your employees?
Everything that you can think of that an IG would do. Fraud, employee rights, EEO complaints. That inspector, actually it grew a little bit like Topsy, I think that both of us would agree. That actually it grew to an office of maybe where there were 30 people working in the IG office over at LAUSD, but that person looked at everything.
And we did recognize at some point the need for the Inspector General to have some legal assistance. We had eventually provided with that Inspector General with funding to hire an attorney, and that was your point is valid, Mr. Tufts, that person needs to have some legal knowledge or to have some assistance, because there's a lot of legal issues involved.
That's right.
But the solution there was, once that was identified as a need, he hired an outside law firm, independent of anyone associated with the school district, to provide that legal assistance.
And that may not be, Councilmember Weiss, that may not be the way to go, but what I'm wanting you to hear me say is that I would not like to cut off the ability to take a look at as broad a canvas as we can before we narrow.
No, I understand that, and I do agree with you that it is certainly possible, and indeed you have an example of an individual who is not a lawyer, who nonetheless did a good job of protecting people's rights, which is apparently what you're saying about this fellow Molinex. I don't know, I've never met him, but because ultimately this is a job where people's rights really are very much at stake. I'm not familiar personally with, and I know a decent amount about the Inspector General world, and I know a decent amount about investigations, I know a decent amount about law. I'm not familiar with non-lawyers doing this stuff, and I'm not familiar with how you can sort of hold them accountable in the way you can hold lawyers accountable, because lawyers are held accountable by an entity independent of the city. Who makes the hiring decision here?
The commission will make the
commission will hire the Inspector General?
Or
the Inspector General serves at the pleasure of the commission?
At this point, the independent, whatever that person is called, reports to and serves at the, and you'll be able to see it in this first draft, would report to and serve at the pleasure of the commission, because it's the only way for you to really get that person out of the chain of command. There isn't any other way to get them out of the chain of command. But we certainly will take into consideration the need to look at what you get if you're going to have a lawyer as opposed to what you would get if you had a person who just had very strong skills but really, was not a licensed practicing attorney. One of the reasons that we have actually turned this task over to Andrew Freeman is because he is an attorney, and he has a lot of background in having served on panels, worked with the county sheriff's department, worked with the personnel commission, served on other blue ribbon commissions, and as a backup for Commissioner Friedman, Commissioner Tolentino is also going to be involved in this. He is at this point an administrative law judge, but I think all of you are aware of his legal background. One of the good things about the commission is that there's a breadth of talent. This is actually not my area, although I am the president and I am copied on a lot of the information, this is not my area of expertise. I want to be very clear with people about that. And so the thinking on the commission's part was to make sure that those commissioners that had expertise in this area were the ones who would take the lead on this, and I think that's the way you get the best thinking done from an oversight body. So perhaps the next time, Commissioner Friedman was in court and he wasn't able to come, so of course I'm pinch hitting for him. But maybe the next time that we have this joint meeting, we'll have Commissioner Freeman and he can, give you a lot more specificity about his thinking and the development of the document.
Thank you very much.
Did you want to say something else?
Sir?
Do you want to add
I want to say
anything?
something else?
No,
Did I misread?
no, I have nothing else.
You had that I don't want to say anything.
Man of few words.
Clearly. Well, thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, I want to thank you all for the work you've done on this. And just as looking at this long term, the much needed change that we have in this area of the fire department, the implications are huge for the PSD and how we organize it, think thoughtfully about it, not rush into it, I think is so important. And this is but one small piece of the overall risk management issue for the fire department. And my committee, the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee, is looking at risk management for the whole city, given that the controller put out a report on it a few months ago, and the realities there are pretty grim. And we would certainly take up the issue of how does the new PSD fit into that overall risk management that we're looking at for the city. So just as a long-term vision for this. So.
I think that's a great idea. I've been told that there is, but I didn't believe when I was told that there was some opposition to having the committee continue to receive quarterly reports. I'm sure none of the people at the table are who I'm referring to, but I think the committee should continue to receive those reports. I think we have another public comment card as well,
Yes, we
Mr.
do.
Chair.
Hey, thank you. Mrs. Chris Matson, please.
Good morning. My name is Chris Matson. My husband worked for the LAFD for over 30 years, and we have a son on the job downtown. Since 2004, I've been asking repeatedly that the fire department update their 1989 substance abuse policy that is outdated and does not meet the standards and best practices of the personnel department, the LAPD, or the scientific and legal communities. Why do I do this? Because in 2004, Bill Bamatri and Andy Fox falsely accused 3 recruits, including our youngest son, of being under the influence of alcohol and ordered their termination after they were made to undergo an invalid first void of urine test for alcohol. The multi-million-dollar jury awards and settlements confirm that both Bill Bamatri and Andy Fox were derelict in duty, and it was no surprise when they were both forced from their jobs. The LAFD is still in need of respected chief officers with character and integrity who admit when they're wrong, especially when good evidence is presented to them. Without that, members like my son and the other recruits will continue to be forced to file lawsuits to pursue justice. Finally, in 2006, after my repeated public comments like this, Fire Commissioner Tolentino directed a review of the policy, and the city attorney, Janet Jackson, said she would have it reviewed. In 2007, Chief Arguelles reported that Dr. Staley of the Personnel Department recommended that the LAFD incorporate a breathalyzer, since that's the standard and best practice of the industry, the Personnel Department, and the LAPD. Just last week, more than 1 year later, I asked for an update at a small Fire Commission committee meeting, and Commissioner Tolentino asked Chief Terrazas and Chief Mathis of the new Professional Standards Division if they had incorporated a breathalyzer yet. Chief Mathis said no. Commissioner Tolentino asked why. They gave no response whatsoever. It's unconscionable that the new Professional Standards Division still subjects members to unjust discipline based on an invalid chemical test. This is a continuing injustice to all LAFD members, but it is also a continuing litigation risk to the taxpayers who elected you to represent them. Please do something about this bad policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Metzen. To summarize, I guess it's the sense of this committee, the joint committee, that a lot of progress has been made. We thank the participants in creating the PSD, and we would ask the CAO, CLA, and the fire department that we'll continue with these quarterly meetings to monitor progress. I think we've done a lot, but we owe it to the public who has also been monitoring the years of incidents at the fire department, and now that we're certainly addressing it, we want to make sure that the public understands that we've taken these incidents seriously, and we're going to discuss these in an open forum to make sure that the public follows the progress that we're making to improve the situation. So thank you very much. And Mr. Weiss, does that end the meeting? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.